The sound of ceramic shattering against tile is something you don't forget. It echoes differently in your own kitchen. I was standing at the sink when I heard it, the sharp crack, the splintering crash, followed by a silence so heavy it felt engineered. I didn't turn around immediately. I already knew what I would see. When I finally did, my son Daniel was breathing hard, his jaw tight, his hands still curled like he hadn't finished the motion. The coffee mug, my late husband's favorite, navy blue with a chipped handle, lay in jagged pieces near the island. Across from him stood his wife, Emily. She didn't scream. She didn't cry. She just stood there, one hand trembling slightly at her side. A thin line of coffee ran down the cabinet behind her, like a stain no one would be able to scrub away. "What the hell is wrong with you?" I asked quietly. Daniel didn't look at me. "Stay out of it, Mom. Stay out of it. In my own house." That was the moment I understood something I had refused to see for years. This wasn't about a mug. It wasn't about spilled coffee. It wasn't even about Emily. It was about control. Daniel had always believed this house, the house his father built from nothing, was already his. He'd said it jokingly at family dinners. Future inheritance, he'd call it. But lately, it hadn't sounded like a joke. Emily's eyes met mine. There was a plea in them. Not for protection, for acknowledgement. For someone to witness what she had been living with. "You embarrassed me." Daniel muttered to her. "I disagreed with you." She replied softly. That was enough for him to throw something. I felt something inside me shift. A quiet, cold click, like a lock sliding into place. I didn't yell. I didn't threaten. I simply said, "Daniel, you need to leave." He laughed. "It's my house too." No, it wasn't. And he had no idea how wrong he was. That night, after they left, I swept up the broken pieces of ceramic with slow, deliberate strokes. I kept one shard and placed it in my pocket. A reminder. Because when a man shows you who he is in your kitchen, you believe him, and you act accordingly. By the time I went to bed, I had already decided. My son had mistaken kindness for weakness for far too long, and I was about to correct that mistake. I thought the coffee mug was the breaking point. It wasn't. The real fracture came 3 nights later, in a manila envelope left on my dining table. Emily arrived alone. No car in the driveway but hers. No Daniel storming ahead of her. She looked smaller somehow, as if she had been slowly folding into herself for years, and I was only just noticing. "I didn't know where else to go," she said. I gestured for her to sit. She didn't. Instead, she slid the envelope toward me. Inside were copies of documents, loan agreements, property drafts, my property. At the top of one page was my address. Beneath it, Daniel's name. "What is this?" I asked, though my hands had already gone cold. "He's been trying to leverage your house," she said quietly, "using it as implied collateral, telling investors it will be transferred to him within the year." Transferred. Without my signature. Without my knowledge. My chest tightened, not from anger, but from something worse. Betrayal wrapped in entitlement. "He said you promised it," Emily continued. "He's been taking money. A lot of it." I flipped through the pages. There were emails printed out, Daniel assuring a private investor that the deed will be updated soon. There were projections based on liquidating my property. He wasn't just assuming inheritance. He was monetizing my death before I was even gone. "How long?" I asked. 8 months. 8 months of lies. 8 months of building a business model around stripping me of my security. "And you?" I asked carefully. "Where do you stand in all this?" Her lips pressed together. "I signed some early documents. He told me it was routine. When I realized what he was doing, I confronted him." She hesitated. "He said if I didn't support him, I'd be replaceable." Replaceable. I felt the same cold click inside me that I'd felt in the kitchen, but louder this time. Daniel hadn't just thrown a mug. He had built a quiet scheme around my house, around my legacy, around my trust, and he thought I would never notice. That night, after Emily left, I sat in my study with the documents spread across my desk. The grandfather clock ticked behind me, steady and patient. Daniel believed 2 things. That I was Nadavi, and that I loved him too much to act. He was wrong about both. I reached for my phone, not to call him, but to call someone else. Because betrayal isn't always loud. Sometimes it's drafted, printed, and signed in ink. And when your own son starts planning your financial funeral, while you're still alive, you don't scream. You strategize. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in my husband's old leather chair, the manila envelope resting on my lap like something alive, something breathing in the dark. Every tick of the grandfather clock felt accusatory. Where did I go wrong? I raised Daniel to be ambitious, to build, to lead, to never depend on anyone. But somewhere along the way, ambition had curdled into entitlement, and I had helped feed it. There were signs. The jokes about, when this place is mine, the subtle pressure about state planning. The way he dismissed Emily's opinions at dinner as if they were decorative, not valid. I remembered defending him once. He's just stressed, I told Emily months ago. The shame of that memory burned more than the documents in front of me. Love blinds you, but denial deafens you. I thought about confronting him immediately. I even rehearsed it in my head. Daniel, how dare you? But I knew how that would go. He would deflect. He would twist. He would say it was just business. He would accuse me of mistrusting him. And somehow, by the end of the conversation, I would be the unreasonable one. That was his real talent. Control without raising his voice. Emily had lived inside that quiet manipulation. I saw it now, the way she measured her words, the way she braced for reaction before speaking. And then there was the coffee mug, thrown not to injure but to intimidate. A demonstration. A preview. I stood and walked into the kitchen. The tile had been cleaned, but I could still see the faint shadow where the coffee had splashed. Damage leaves residue, even when scrubbed. I opened the cabinet and stared at the remaining mugs. Ordinary, harmless objects. Until they weren't. I loved my son. That was the truth clawing at me. I loved the little boy who used to fall asleep on my shoulder. The teenager who cried when his father died. But I did not recognize the man who monetized my home and threatened his wife's replaceability. And that was the second truth. By morning, the internal debate had ended. This was no longer about punishment. It was about boundaries, about protection, about consequences. If I allowed this to slide, I wouldn't just lose my house, I would lose myself, and I refused to become collateral in my own life. I picked up my phone and scrolled to 3 contacts, 1 attorney, 1 banker, 1 person Daniel would never expect. My thumb hovered for only a second, because motherhood had protected him for decades. But now, it was time for motherhood to protect something else. Revenge, if done correctly, is quiet. It doesn't slam doors. It doesn't shout. It doesn't announce itself at Sunday dinner. It makes appointments. My first call was to my attorney, Richard Hale. He had handled my husband's estate 15 years ago and knew every inch of our financial history. Richard, I said evenly, I need to review my deed, my will, and every power of attorney connected to my name. He paused only briefly. Has something happened?
Yes,
I replied. Something that requires precision. Within 48 hours, I was sitting across from him in his downtown office, documents spread neatly between us. Everything was still in my name. Daniel had no legal claim, no signature, no access, but intention matters. And if someone were implying future transfer to secure private funds, I asked. Richard's expression hardened. That could constitute fraud, especially if used to influence investors. Good. I didn't want noise. I wanted leverage. My second call was to my bank. I restructured accounts, moved assets into a trust Daniel couldn't touch, and placed alerts on any inquiry involving my property. Quiet locks on invisible doors. The third call took longer to make. I stepped onto my back porch before dialing. Emily answered on the second ring. I need you to come over, I told her. Loan. When she arrived, I didn't waste time. I know what he's doing, I said, and I intend to stop it. Her shoulders sagged not in relief, but in exhaustion. You don't have to protect him anymore, I told her, but you do have to decide who you're protecting now. Tears welled in her eyes, though none fell. He'll destroy me if I cross him. No, I said quietly. He'll try. There's a difference. I laid out the strategy carefully. Documentation, recorded communications, financial timelines. If Daniel had used my property as leverage, I would give his investors something far more compelling, the truth. Not publicly. Strategically. I wasn't interested in humiliating him. I was interested in dismantling the illusion he built. Before she left, Emily looked at me differently. Not like a mother-in-law, like an ally. That night, Daniel texted me casually. Dinner this weekend. As if nothing had shifted. As if the ground beneath him wasn't already thinning. I stared at the message for a long time before replying. Of course. Because the most effective consequences are delivered with a calm voice and a steady hand. And my son had no idea that every move he'd made over the last 8 months was about to be audited, not by strangers, by his own mother. Daniel chose the restaurant. An upscale steakhouse downtown, dim lighting, polished silver. The kind of place where people talk about acquisitions in low, confident voices. He always preferred environments that made him feel powerful. I arrived 10 minutes early. Control begins with timing. When Daniel walked in, he wore that same easy smile he'd perfected in business meetings. He kissed my cheek. "Mom, you look good." "I feel good," I replied. That was true, because for the first time in months, I wasn't walking into a conversation blind. Dinner started pleasantly enough, small talk. Market trends, his expansion plans. He spoke in projections in future tense, as if everything he envisioned was already inevitable. Then he mentioned it. Once the house transfers, liquidity won't be an issue. There it was, calm, casualed. I set my wine glass down carefully. The house isn't transferring. He laughed lightly. "Mom, we've talked about this." "No," I said evenly. "You've talked about it." His jaw tightened just slightly, a crack in the Polish. "It's strategic," he continued. "You're not getting any younger. This protects assets." Protects. I reached into my bag and slid a single document across the table. Not everything. Just enough. A formal notice drafted by my attorney, clarifying sole ownership, revoking any implied transfer authority, and warning against fraudulent representation of my property in financial negotiations. Daniel's smile faded. "What is this?" he asked. "It's a boundary." His eyes scanned the page quickly. I watched the shift, confidence draining into calculation. "You went behind my back?" he asked quietly. "No," I replied. "I went around you." "There's a difference." He leaned back in his chair. "You don't understand how business works. And you don't understand how consequences work," I said calmly. I didn't accuse him. I didn't mention the investors. Not yet. But he knew. He always prided himself on reading rooms. Tonight, he realized the room had been rearranged without him. "Emily put you up to this?" he asked. That told me everything. "No," I said. "You did." The check arrived shortly after. He didn't offer to pay. When we stood to leave, Daniel's voice dropped low. "You're making a mistake." I met his gaze steadily. "No, Daniel. I'm correcting one." As I walked to my car, my phone buzzed. A notification from my attorney. The first investor meeting had been rescheduled. Permanently. I allowed myself a small, controlled breath. Wasn't destruction. This was destabilization, and it had begun. The explosion didn't happen immediately. It simmered. For 2 weeks, Daniel didn't call. No casual texts, no forced politeness, just silence, the kind meant to make you uncomfortable. It didn't work. What did work, at least for him, was panic. Because one by one, the investors began pulling back. Not dramatically, not publicly. Quiet emails. Reassessing involvement. Awaiting clarification of asset control. Delaying capital release. Precision. I hadn't accused him of fraud. I hadn't shamed him. I had simply allowed the truth to reach the right ears. And the truth travels fast when money is involved. He showed up at my house on a Thursday evening without warning. He didn't knock gently. He pounded. I opened the door slowly. "Good evening, Daniel." He stormed past me into the foyer. "What did you do?" "I protected myself." "You contacted them," he snapped. "You interfered." I corrected misinformation. His face was flushed now, the calm businessman gone. "Do you have any idea what you've cost me?" "Yes," I said quietly. "Exactly what you tried to cost me." That landed. For a moment we stood there, mother and son, no audience, no polished table between us. "You're sabotaging your own family," he said. "No," I replied. "I'm refusing to finance manipulation." He laughed bitterly. This house was always going to be mine. There it was again, ownership without permission. "Not anymore," I said. He stilled. "What does that mean?" I walked to my desk and retrieved the final document. A revised estate plan. Irrevocable. The house had been transferred into a protected trust. Primary beneficiary. A domestic abuse legal defense fund Emily had once quietly donated to. Secondary allocations to charities Daniel had publicly mocked as unprofitable. His name was absent. Completely. "You disinherited me," he asked, voice barely controlled. "I redirected my legacy?" I corrected. "You're choosing outsiders over your own son." "I'm choosing integrity over entitlement." His hands curled into fists, not violent, but furious. "You'll regret this," he said. I met his gaze steadily. "No, Daniel. I regret not doing it sooner." Silence stretched between us. For the first time in his life, he had no leverage here. No financial projection. No implied control. Just consequence. He left without slamming the door. That was the most telling part, because anger fades, but realization lingers. And as I stood alone in my foyer, I understood something with unsettling clarity. This was no longer about money. It was about power. And I had just taken mine back. The fallout didn't come in one dramatic collapse. It unraveled, slowly, publicly, inevitably. Daniel's company had been balancing on projected capital tied to an illusion of future liquidity. Once that illusion dissolved, so did confidence. Within a month, 2 partners exited. One filed a formal complaint regarding misrepresentation of secured assets. I didn't initiate it, but I didn't stop it either. I heard most of it through silence. No Sunday calls, no updates, no invitations. Then Emily came to see me again. She looked different, not smaller, stronger. He moved out, she said simply. I let that settle. He blames you, she added. I expected that. She nodded. He says you destroyed his future. I almost smiled, not from humor, but from irony. No, I said. I refused to underwrite it. Emily sat across from me at the kitchen table, the same place the mug had shattered weeks ago. He's spiraling, she admitted, angry, defensive, saying everyone betrayed him. Did he ever consider, I asked carefully, that he betrayed first? She didn't answer. She didn't need to. Later that evening, Daniel finally called. I let it ring once before answering. His voice was different now. Not explosive, not charming. Stripped. He said, I know. You set this in motion. No, I corrected calmly. Your choices did. Silence. Then, quietly, you really cut me out.
Yes.
A long exhale on the other end. You chose her over me. That was the wound speaking. I chose accountability, I replied. He didn't argue this time, because deep down, he knew. The investors weren't leaving because of me. They were leaving because trust, once cracked, doesn't reseal. After we hung up, I stood alone in the kitchen again. The house felt different, not lighter, just honest. There's a cost to consequences. Not just for the person facing them, but for the one enforcing them. I had lost the illusion of my son. But illusions are expensive things to maintain, and I was no longer willing to pay for one. A week later, I received official notice. Daniel's primary venture had dissolved, legally, publicly, final. And for the first time since the mug shattered on my floor, I allowed myself to feel something other than strategy. Grief, because justice can be necessary, and still hurt. The last time Daniel stood in my kitchen, he didn't look angry. He looked tired. There were faint lines around his eyes I didn't recognize. His confidence, once sharp and polished, had dulled into something more human. I just need to understand, he said quietly. It had been 3 months since everything collapsed. The company was gone. The partners had scattered. Emily had filed for separation. The audit had concluded without criminal charges, but with enough documented misrepresentation to ensure no serious investor would touch him for a long time. Consequences. Not destruction. Just truth recorded. You don't understand, I replied gently, because you never believed I would act. He didn't argue. That house, he said slowly, was supposed to be security.
For you,
I said. He looked up at me. And for you, he added. I held his gaze. Security built on assumption isn't security, it's dependency. Silence stretched between us, but it wasn't hostile anymore. It was reflective. I thought you'd always fix things, he admitted. That's what you've always done. And there it was. Not greed. Not purely. Expectation. I had protected him from small failures as a boy. Smoothed consequences. Negotiated outcomes. I told myself it was love, maybe it was. But unchecked protection becomes permission. I won't fix this, I said calmly. You need to build something that isn't borrowed from me. He swallowed. And the trust, he asked. It stands. No drama, no reversal. Legacy is a choice. I don't hate you, I told him. He nodded faintly. I know. That was the first honest exchange we'd had in years. When he left that afternoon, he didn't slam the door. He didn't threaten. He didn't accuse. He simply walked out like a man who had finally realized that entitlement and inheritance are not the same thing. Weeks later, I received a short message from him. I'm starting over. Without shortcuts. I didn't reply immediately. Some journeys need silence more than encouragement. As for the house, it remains exactly where it has always been. Mine. But more importantly, my peace remains mine too. The shard of that navy blue mug still sits in my desk drawer, not as a symbol of anger, as a reminder. When someone mistakes your love for leverage, you don't scream. You adjust the terms. And sometimes, the greatest revenge isn't ruin, it's refusal. Moral love without boundaries breeds entitlement. But love with accountability creates the possibility of change.